Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. How significant is the Supreme Court's moral homily that MPs facing serious charges mustn't become ministers? And what difference will it make to our politics? That's the debate in part 2, when we ask, what exactly has the Supreme Court achieved by speaking out? But first, the Rajnath Singh controversy. Was it inevitable that this would dominate the news, or is that because the BJP has badly mishandled this development? In fact, could this end up being a self-inflicted blow? Join me in a moment to find out. And now joining me to discuss just how effectively the BJP has handled the Rajnath Singh controversy is BJP spokesperson Sambit Patra. Joining me soon, the political editor of Open Magazine, Hartosh Singh Bal. Also joining me soon, the opinion page editor of the Indian Express, Vandita Mishra. And here in studio, former professor of politics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Zoya Hassan. Sambit Patra, let me start with a simple question. With the benefit of 24 hours hindsight, can you accept that your party has badly mishandled the Rajnath Singh episode, as a result of which pretty innocuous rumours that no one took seriously have suddenly blown up into a huge controversy?
No, I believe contrary to what you are saying, Karan, it has been very aptly and rightly handled by the Bharatiya Janata Party. And as to why I say so, I mean, we have two governments to compare over here. We had the previous dispensation of the UPA and we have the NDA dispensation right now. During the UPA dispensation, we saw all the humongous scams in the way that there was no communication by the government to the people. And in fact, it is not I who am saying this. Even the Congress spokespersons went ahead to say that, well, yes, there was a communication gap. But here is a government which is aptly handling the communication department. Well, yes, if there is some kind of news in the print media, if there is something afloat in the electronic media, then it is the duty of the government to quell the rumors and nip them at the bud itself, and this is what the government has done.
Even if the rumors are less than credible, not taken seriously by anyone and dismissed by most people, surely then, by attracting attention to them, all you're doing is giving them credibility rather than dismissing them.
No, I believe, the paramount importance, the mission of this government is development. Anything that comes in the way of development, in the sense that the kind of rumor that spreads and causes some kind of... No. It is important that no rumor should be given place. It should be given space in the kind of work that we are doing.
I don't deny that anything that comes in the way of development must be removed.
Yes.
But actually, this rumor wasn't in the way of development because no one was taking it seriously. But what you've done by your mishandling is actually to create a block for development. So you've created the block by your mishandling. Had you ignored these rumors, dismissed them with the utter contempt they deserved, you would have had no problem today.
No, I believe, contrary to what you say, in fact, we have given respect to the media in the sense that, look, most of the newspapers were carrying on
this as a favor to the media.
No, not favor
this
to
was your kindness to us so that we have stories to discuss tonight.
Not kindness to the media in the sense media carried out the news and we had to rebut it, nipping it at the bud. We did that, and I believe any sensible government should have the openness and communication. What's wrong in it?
All right. Vandita Mishra, let me come to what I consider the many different stages of the mishandling of this whole Rajnath Singh episode and take them up one by one. First, should Rajnath Singh have exposed his personal anguish to the public? After all, didn't that A suggest that this was a bigger issue, and B, that he felt vulnerable? Had he kept silent, no one would have said a thing.
Karan, this whole thing has been at a level, and it remains at a level of rumor, innuendo, gossip. We actually don't have any hard information. Even the paper that put out Rajnath Singh's name did not do any investigation of the charges. I think the more interesting point here is that for a long time, the BJP, which has been a very instinctively argumentative party, as opposed to the Congress, for instance, which is, a party where there is an entrenched culture of second guessing. The BJP, for some time, got subdued and silenced by the weight of Modi's success. And then, there has been this attempt by Amit Shah to recast the party in a more tidy and uniform way, get everybody on the same page. Now, this Rajnath Singh episode, I think shows that there is ferment within the party.
Can I stop you? I'll come to what it... Can I stop you, Vandita Mishra? I'll come to what it shows later. I definitely will take up the consequences of this. But I want to first concentrate on whether it's been well handled or not. And in terms of the handling, do you believe Rajnath was right to go public? and A, attract attention to something that most people weren't aware of, and B, then suggest his vulnerability? Or do you think he would have been better advised to keep silent?
His name had come out in a newspaper. I think he must have felt, he is the country's home minister, he must have felt the need to put out a defense. And at the end of it, it's true that the person who loses the most in this entire episode is also Rajnath Singh, because he comes across looking vulnerable, looking like throwing a tantrum, and calling for the Prime Minister as well as the party president to come out and defend him in public. So almost pleading with them to do so in the way in the sequence of events.
Hartosh Bhatt, let's take up what I call the second stage of this alleged mishandling of the Rajnath Singh episode. After going public, should Rajnath Singh have revealed to the journalists that in fact he'd approached Amit Shah and the Prime Minister? Didn't that indicate the level of worry that he was going through? Had he not mentioned their names, simply made a denial on his own and then walked away, it would have been a much lower order story. But the second he brought in the PM and the party president, he escalated it because he suggested to the world how worried he was. So was that another error of judgment on his part?
Karan, the only way you can read that is to believe that Rajnath Singh felt it important that Amit Shah and Narendra Modi actually issue clarifications, which to me indicates that there is a battle going on in the BJP. These rumors were spreading within the BJP. Rajnath was getting targeted and isolated. He could find no out. And going public was an act of desperation. Naming Amit Shah and Narendra Modi was one way of ensuring that the party had to back him on this.
Except that in the process,
it would become a much more serious issue.
Except that in the process, by naming the Prime Minister and the party president, he revealed his vulnerability in a much bigger way than he would have had he been silent and ignored the issue.
Well, if he had remained silent, the damage that was being done to him, his isolation, which we all know for a period of time was becoming almost complete, he would have been reduced to a cipher. At least from this point on, I think the way Rajnath Singh sees it, any attempt to isolate him further will attract public attention.
All right. A third area where you could argue that Rajnath Singh and the BJP's handling has been mistaken and it's escalated the story rather than dampen it down is when the Prime Minister and then the party president came out with their individual statements. Once again, the impact was to make this a yet bigger story, draw much greater attention to it. Silence from them would have been perhaps more advisable because it would have dampened it down.
I think you're absolutely right that Rajnath Singh going public with his complaint, and then even more importantly, as I think you're suggesting, the Prime Minister responding to it and the President of the party, Amit Shah, responding to it, has certainly lent credibility to these rumors. But I think the point that is being made by the previous commentators is very important, that there is a certain context in which all this is happening, and the context is the isolation of Rajnath Singh, and there are two or three things. One is that, I mean, this is all a conflict about the number 2 position, clearly. But most importantly, the fact that he was not even allowed to appoint his own private secretary, the fact that he was removed from the appointments committee.
But many other ministers weren't allowed to appoint their private secretaries.
No, but he is the Home Minister, and not to be a member of the appointments committee of the cabinet is unusual. This is perhaps the first time that you have an appointments committee of the cabinet which does not have the Home Minister.
Can I put this
now,
to you?
That diminishes his position immensely.
Can I put this to you? There's no doubt that there is a sense in which many believed that Rajnath Singh was isolated within his party and being diminished. But that was known to political observers primarily, and to those who read the fine print of some newspaper articles. It wasn't general public perception. Suddenly, by speaking out, by citing the Prime Minister and the party president, then by getting them to intervene and issue statements, he's made it something that every single Indian watching TV knows about. So from something that a small cognoscenti knew, it's become a problem that the whole world knows. Surely it would have been in his interest and the party's interest to contain and limit the knowledge of the isolation and then handle it, rather than make it a big national issue.
Yeah, but you see, the point is that as far as Rajnath Singh is concerned, he is clearly, there is a conflict going on within the party. Now that conflict has come into the open, but to assume that there are no conflicts in the party, that there's no power struggle, I think that
exists in every party.
That exists in every party and certainly exists in the BJP as well.
Let me put it like this, Sambit Patra. I've identified what I call 3 key stages where the BJP has mishandled the Rajnath Singh episode. The first was when Rajnath Singh went public and said he had spoken to the PM and party president. The second was when the Prime Minister issued a statement. The third was when Amit Shah issued a statement. At each of those stages, the story escalated and became bigger and bigger. And your interest would have been, since you consider these rumors, since you consider them unfounded, to actually dampen it down and ensure it's ignored. Instead, you kept blowing it up.
Now, point by point, let me rebut it back. When first and foremost you say that Rajnath ji had a personal anguish and he went to the public, and I believe any straightforward man, any man who is non-corrupt, if he has a rumor thrown on him, definitely he would have anguish and he should address it. And that's the way it should be in democracy, it should be in politics. Secondly, you say that he brought it into the notice of the Prime Minister and the party president.
I don't say he said it.
You are questioning me that he has, yes, he brought it to the notice of the Prime Minister and the party president, and they act in coherence. This only shows the inclusive nature of polity, the symbiotic nature of polity that Bharatiya Janata Party has. Thirdly, and most importantly, you say that silence would have dampened the rumors. I believe this government has the skills of communications. Silence may have fueled the rumors rather than dampening it. And lastly, about the conflict within the party, Karan, let me remind you, we have got a fantastic mandate only 2 months ago because we have 3 months ago, because we have no conflict within us. The ones who had conflict are lost.
Hartoor Singh Bal, you've heard, in fact, Sambit Patra say that this is an example not of mishandling, but of excellent communication on the part of the BJP. Do you believe that that is what it shows? Excellent communication? That at every level the party cohered and sent out the same message, as a result of which rumors that the world was not taking seriously, many people in fact weren't even aware of them, have now become the big top national story on TV and the papers. So is this excellent handling or extremely peculiar handling?
Look, Karan, if they consider this excellent handling, if the handling gets any better, they are in very serious trouble, because they are not learning the right lessons of communication from this episode. Clearly, this is one of the problems that we've seen, the extreme centralization around Modi of communication, of the ability of ministers to speak to the public. The rumors became rife because there is silence in the party about everything. The rumors spread within the party because I think most people in the party believe that these are the kind of rumors that Narendra Modi himself would be pleased with, because it showed him in a good light. Whether the directions came or not doesn't matter, but this is how the BJP itself within was playing itself out. And Rajnath Singh is far more bothered about what is happening inside the BJP than the larger public, which is why he doesn't care whether it becomes public knowledge actually.
Absolutely, that's a very good point. His audience and his concern was to damp down a past struggle that he believed was happening in his party, and he ignored the fact that what could have been isolated and contained with the party as a result was blown out into a national issue. Vandita, let me put the opposite to you. I imagine Mr. Rajnath Singh felt that he had to respond because the Economic Times yesterday had taken these rumors and front paged them, and as a result of which, what were rumors that could have been ignored had suddenly got a credibility and a publicity that they simply didn't have. But on the other hand, suppose he'd kept quiet. Wouldn't the Economic Times story have been forgotten by today or by tomorrow? Instead, what you now have is every single paper in the country building up on that same story and adding to it.
We don't know whether it would have been forgotten or not. These are charges against the Home Minister of the country. And as the other commentators have pointed out, Rajnath Singh is in a particularly vulnerable situation where he is a number 2 without actually having the powers of a number 2. So I think he must have, in that particular circumstance that he finds himself in, he must have felt it necessary to speak out. Of course, the question that can still be raised is, why did the PMO dignify these rumors? You know, surely the PM has more important things on his plate than to respond to rumors, even if they are about his Home Minister.
And should Amit Shah have kept silent as well?
I think once the PM spoke, Amit Shah, who clearly takes his cues from whatever the PM does, perhaps felt the need to speak out as well. I think the important thing was when the PM decided that this was something where he needed to break his silence. A silence that he hasn't broken for these 3 months on very many important issues, but he felt the need to come out and speak out on this. I think Amit Shah simply took his cue from there.
And you're saying that was ill-advised. Silence from the PM, dismissing this whole episode with the contempt it deserves would have been a better strategy. Have I understood that correctly?
I'm saying we don't know which would have been better. That you can say that it was ill-advised, but you can perhaps make the point that given that it was the Home Minister who was throwing a tantrum, a public tantrum about it, about his name coming out like this, and feeling that he's at the target of sniper fire within the party, perhaps the PM felt he had no choice.
Let me put it like this. Beyond the issue of whether this was well handled, badly handled, atrociously handled, we're now left with the consequences of the way it's been handled. Let's come to that. The first consequence is that television channels, several newspapers are demanding inquiries into Pankaj Singh, the Home Minister's alleged attempts to influence and transfers of postings of the Delhi police. There are even allegations of bribery and corruption that people say must be inquired into. 24 hours earlier, no one was talking about this. Today, they all are. Isn't that an unfortunate outcome for the government? That people want inquiries into the Home Minister's propriety and his son's propriety?
Well, but as you are saying, the government and the Prime Minister are responsible for it, because they have dignified these rumours by responding in the way in which they have responded.
Can I ask you a naughty question? Do you think they deliberately dignified it, realizing that the outcome would be what I'm saying it is? An inquiry into, or a demand for an inquiry into the Home Minister and his son? Was that part of the reason why they dignified it?
I'm wondering about that. I'm really wondering whether there is more to it than meets the eye. I'm not suggesting that this deserves an investigation, but we certainly need to know what is the source of these rumours. How did it reach the media? How did it reach the Economic Times?
I want to bring you in.
There is something that is going on there.
Did you hear what Zoya Hassan just said?
I've heard everyone.
She said very importantly that a question has been raised in her mind that the PM and the party president deliberately dignified these rumours, so to speak, because they knew the consequence of doing so would be a public demand for an inquiry into the probity of the Home Minister's son and possibly the Home Minister himself. In other words, this gave them an excuse to carry on a party feud by other means. You know, that's one consequence of the mishandling. That's the level to which we've got to now in this discussion.
What I'm saying is that there's more than meets the eye.
That's the precise point.
I mean, let me answer. I've heard everyone. Give me some time. First and foremost, I believe, and I believe half of the world today in India believes, that this government has no sources. I mean, you do not have leaking pipes from where you get the sources. So it's but
definitely have leaking pipes. Where did the Economic Times pick up the story?
Karan, allow me. You were not interrupting
and the paper said a minister had told them.
You were not interrupting anyone. Allow me some time, since the fingers are
I'm only
pointing towards
correcting you.
Since the fingers are pointing towards me, let me answer. No leaking pipes. So I believe the water has been collected from the well. Gossip columns have started appearing over here. Secondly, you say that the PM responded to the letter and made it all dignified. I would say this, in fact, demolishes the idea that he is an autocratic Prime Minister, as most of you all debated. He is a caring Prime Minister. He cares for all his ministers. Ironically, about a few days ago, we were debating he does not care about his ministers.
Can I interrupt? What this shows is the Prime Minister doesn't know when to speak and when to be silent. He chooses the wrong issue at the wrong time.
This Prime Minister knows what to speak and when to speak, and that is the reason as to why he has got the mandate, because he spoke the way the people of this country had never heard before. And lastly, I would say that this whole fiasco has only showed that there are exceptionally organized communication skills with this government.
Exceptionally organized communication skills?
Yes. In the sense you are saying,
are you being satirical about your government?
No.
Are you taking the mickey out of your party?
We all function in inclusion, in symbiotic manner, and in fact we
like that word symbiotic, don't you?
Definitely,
you used it twice.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Hartosh Singhbal, I'm not going to repeat that compliment that you've just heard Sambit Patra pay his party, but what I'm going to point out instead is this, that a second consequence of what I consider the mishandling of this issue is that today the country is asking the question, is there a sharp division at the top of the BJP? Are there people who are trying to cut the Home Minister down to size? Worse still, are there people who are challenging his emergence and crystallization as the number 2? Now, All parties have internal rivalries and divisions. The BJP is not a unique party in that sense. But all parties don't make their internal divisions a front page story in the papers. The BJP has. Was that really a silly thing to do, or was it inevitable?
Karan, I think it was inevitable. I think there are 2-3 issues here. One, I don't think once Rajnath Singh went public, the PM could have stayed silent or dismissed as a rumor. That would have been a second direct snub to Rajnath Singh. It would have left very little room for the party to maneuver. That could only have happened if they really want to signal that Rajnath Singh is out. The second thing you have to see is that while during the campaign Rajnath Singh had the post of BJP president, his effective strength comes from UP. All this was happening when the UP question of UP tickets was happening, the star campaigner for UP. You can see that the party in UP is moving away from the kind of moderation Rajnath Singh represents. Yogi Adityanath has been appointed as one of the star campaigners. Clearly, the party is focusing in on a different way. So Rajnath Singh is marginalized not within the ministry, he is getting marginalized within the party as well. And this shows a certain direction where the party is going. Okay. I think it is inevitable that this rift will only grow.
Let me then put this to you, Vandita Mishra. As a result of this episode, the way it's exploded, the questions that are being asked, the inquiries that are being demanded, is this a media story that's attracting attention simply because it's catchy, or is it a media story that's actually damaging this government?
It is certainly damaging to the government. But like I said earlier, I think this is for the media. It is a very welcome indication that the BJP is coming to life again. There is sniping, there is infighting, there is targeting of each other within the party. For a journalist, I think that's the challenge now, to cover that within Amit Shah's party, within Modi's party, within a party that seemed for a while to be subsiding into silence and uniformity.
Okay, in other words, the BJP returns to normality, squabbling and screaming and scratching its eyes out. But let me put this to you, Zoya Hassan. How does the Home Minister emerge from all of this? In the short term, no doubt, this has damaged his image. But will it in the somewhat longer term also affect his functioning and his credibility, or do you think not?
I think it has diminished his authority. He has to live with this taint. Even if it's a rumor, the fact is that, let's face it, I mean, many corruption charges are often rumors, but they do diminish the credibility of the person against whom these charges have been made. So I think they have diminished.
Rajnath is a big loser in your eyes.
His authority has been diminished, but equally I would say it has diminished the authority of the party and the government as well, at a time when the Supreme Court has put the moral responsibility on the Prime Minister and Chief Ministers to cleanse the government.
Let me put this to you. Has this shaken the belief the country had that Mr. Modi is a sure-footed Prime Minister, adept and adroit at handling awkward situations? Suddenly, a situation that was not actually a difficult one has been converted into a problem and an awkward one by his handling. So has it damaged his image?
Karan, I would say this may act as a masala for a few of the curries of for newsroom, but definitely the people of India have already spoken their language by giving the kind of mandate that they have given. Because, let me remind you, it's not that Modi became the Prime Minister without having any administrative experiences. We have seen for 12 long years his rule in Gujarat, his performance in Gujarat, and that is the reason as to why people thought, people felt, and people realized that here is a Prime Minister who can fulfill aspirations. Rumor mongers have been nailed, nothing else has happened.
I like the way you phrase it. This is enough masala to flavor the curries. Let me tell you, those are curries that journalists will be feeding off, and many of your partymen will feel as if they are feeding off you as well.
For the people,
that's the cost you've incurred for the people, by providing masala to us.
For the people, just a second, Joya. For the people, the curry is development, and we have enough stock of development.
I think it's also a cost of, if I may add to what you said, a cost of keeping the media at arm's length. Now the media has got a story that they can really work on.
In other words, once the media starts to bite, you can make sure they'll bite and bite. All right, my thanks to both of the two of you for coming to studio. My thanks to Rajnath Singh and Hartosh Bal for joining me.